There you go.
Okay, so a special welcome to Mr. Joseph Beyer, who's a stained glass window artisan and expert. Very privileged to have him speak about stained glass windows in general in Philadelphia and in our parish. So welcome, Joe.
Yes, glad to have all of you here. I'm going to try the impossible here and see if I can
Oh,
share my screen.
you got it. It's working.
I do? That's
Yep.
outstanding. Okay, great. Um, okay, so that is a shot of my studio here in the Germantown section. Um, and it's the perfect building for us. It's about a little more than 13,000 square feet. We've got a large parking lot out back, but we need this much space because there's 25 of us. And it's the perfect building all on one floor. I think I should start with a little bit of background about myself and how I ended up in the stained glass business. I went to art school right after high school, but they would not accept me because I didn't have any art in high school. So I ended up doing a year of community college in Bucks County, and then I could get my foot in the door at an art school. And I went to the school that is now defunct, what was the Philadelphia College of Art, then the Colleges of Art, then the Museum School, and had half a dozen names. They swallowed up a music school, and I think that was the beginning of the end for them. And it was at Broad and Pine, and I'm sure you all are aware of the fact that it no longer exists there. Terrible shame, but it's a problem for us because art schools don't really teach people how to draw anymore. They spend all their days clicking a mouse, and we don't get to um, we don't we don't get applicants that are really capable of drawing portrait level windows for us. So I did an apprenticeship right after college. As soon as I graduated with a degree in painting, I did an apprenticeship at the Willett Studio, which was in Chestnut Hill. And it was really a lucky break for me because it was one of the last old stained glass studios in the United States. William Willett was a contemporary of Louis Comfort Tiffany, and he was a champion. William Willett was a champion of the Gothic revival style. More about that later. And so this studio had survived for a long time in Philadelphia, but it was on its last legs. The Arab oil crisis sort of put it out of business in many ways, especially because it made the glass much more expensive. It takes a lot of natural gas to produce the heat to make the glass. So the glass got very much more expensive, and they had sold a lot of windows. They always had plenty of work, but they were losing money on every single window they were making because the materials had gone up in cost so much that it became quite a problem for them. So they sold the studio, and to make a long story short, I was laid off along with my wife, who I had dragged there. We both had gone there after college. She was setting rings, setting stones and rings, and I dragged her to the Willett Studio where we both did an apprenticeship. And then when they sold the place, we both got laid off. We were going to get married on June 7th, and they laid us off Memorial Day weekend. So we were sort of stuck. She did half a dozen different jobs, and I went out on my own. And I stuck at it long enough till I needed a helper, one, then two, then three. Now there's 25 of us, and that studio that I worked for doesn't exist anymore. And we are now the big fish in a very small pond. So we do work all over the United States and some places beyond. And it has, I don't know where the time went, but it's 45 years later now, and we are as busy as we could possibly be. So let's talk now about stained glass. And I was so impressed with Michael Lewis's presentation. And if you have not seen it, it's on the church's website. He gives a long lecture about the history of church architecture in Philadelphia, especially leading up to St. Patrick's and what were all the influences that led to St. Patrick's being the style that it is. So I would like to do something similar with that now. But before I do that, I would even like to go a little more in depth into stained glass itself, because everybody loves stained glass, but they don't have any clue about how it goes together, what it is. They hear terms like painted glass, leaded glass. They're not sure at all what those things mean. So the best place to start is the glass. And here you see a handful of sheets on an easel up in one of our windows. And the glass I use is exactly the same as the glass I apprenticed with, and that all the greatest artists throughout the history of stained glass used. I use exclusively French and German glass from two different manufacturers, one in South Central France, Saint-Just, which is the largest glass company in the world. They own Certainteed, and their headquarters in the United States is just past Valley Forge. And they own this small boutique company in South Central France where they hand blow glass the same way it's been done for centuries. In Germany, close to the Czech border, there's another company in Bavaria that makes glass exactly the same way. And of course, the French think their glass is superior. It is not, but I let them believe that. So here's another window with a whole lot of glass in front of it, and the glass is being selected for a window. You can see in the foreground are patterns for various pieces of glass that have been placed on glass. Now that glass on the table there looks black, but if you put it up in the window, it'd be full of color, just like the stuff you see in the window there. It's just black because there's no no light coming through it. So here is somebody cutting up the patterns for a window. So if you make a suit of clothes or dress, there's going to be patterns for that. And windows work pretty much the same way. We have lots of different pieces of glass, all different colors, and we have patterns for every single piece. Now, she is cutting these up. It's the sort of job you do with a set of headphones on, because it's very tedious. It takes a long time. You can see the stack of patterns here, and she's cutting through something else here. Now she's got a special pair of scissors here that looks like this on the left here. I don't know if you can tell this, but this is a scissor that has 3 blades in it. This is one blade, and down here you have 2 blades, and this one goes between the two. And what this scissor does is it punches out a small bit of paper that size, and that is enough to allow the glass to have the lead between it. So the lead fits in that small space. And when she cuts up those patterns, she's taking out, you can see some of the excess here. She's punching out that much glass. So every one of these patterns gets a very small amount smaller as she cuts it up with this special 3-bladed scissors. So that's a neat trick that we use. The glass itself is cut with a common glass cutter like this, nothing special, no machinery. It's all done exactly the same way it's been done for centuries. Here is a whole lot of glass that is already cut up for various projects. This is for St. Joseph's, the worker in Orfield. I think that's the Allentown diocese. And all these windows are headed for that church. That's my dog there, Claude. He comes to work with me every day. This is vitreous glass paint. What is that? Well, you've heard people say painted windows. Well, yes, they are painted, but we don't paint the color on. You saw the color in the glass. That color is made by adding minerals to the formula for glass: sand, lime, potash. You add cobalt to it, you get blue. You add copper, you get red. It's a whole lot more complicated than that, but that's how it works. We don't paint the color on the glass. We select the glass from hundreds of colors made for us by the French, the Germans, and cut it up into pieces. But then it gets painted. So what is the painting? Well, it's more like draftsmanship. It doesn't add color to the windows, but it adds dimension, depth, line work, maybe even calligraphy. It's a powdered iron oxide, and that's what you see in this pigment here. This is powdered iron, and it's got ground glass added to that recipe of powdered iron. So it it gets mixed with various mediums and then painted on the window. So here is an artist wearing a pair of surgical gloves, and she's got a fine brush and she's painting this detail on the glass. So she's taken that paint that you saw, the powdered paint, mixed it with Venice turps, which is an obscure material we use to make it flow off of a brush very nicely, thins with turpentine. So it's essentially an oil paint that she's painting with now. When she's done with that, and you can see it here, you can see the tracing here. So it's just line work. So here's a piece of glass that's been painted to be kind of a flower. Here's the wings of the Holy Spirit, etc. So all this is the painting that she is doing on this glass. Now here is shading being added, and somebody's got a fancy brush here that is the old badger hair like you used to have for a shaving brush. For those of us old enough to remember them, that's a shade, like a badger hair brush made with the badger hair. We use that to blend the painting on the glass. So he has taken this paint and mixed it with a water-based medium, like the binder in watercolors, which is gum arabic. So he can go right over the tracing that you see here and add dimension to these flowers here by giving them some shading. Here he's painting a portrait of Eleanor Roosevelt for a window going up in an Episcopal church up in upstate New York. And he's adding all this shading to this window with the same exact paint, but mixed with a different medium. So we've got oil-based underneath, a water-based medium going on top of it. Now here's a window that I'm working on. And this is an early stage of it. The glass has been selected and cut. And what we can do is we can take beeswax and melt it in a saucepan and take an eyedropper and drop hot beeswax in all the corners of these pieces of glass here. You can see it here. See that? That's hot beeswax. We lay this flat on a table and drop hot beeswax between these pieces of glass, and it affixes it to a piece of plate glass. Then we can take that plate glass and put it up in our window and paint on it like an easel painting and stand back. Do we like the colors? Do we like the selecting? And I can paint on this as an easel painting. Now, I've taken this window and I've moved it to another location. Let me see if I can get, come on, let's go. Now I've gotten this thing stuck, it seems. There, okay. So here I've moved this to another window and I'm working on it. You can see up in the top part of the window, I've started adding a lot of the oil-based tracing to it, and then the water-based medium over top of that. So this is early stages of this Good Samaritan window. Now here it is much farther along, maybe a week later, and a lot of the dimension is coming into play here. I've done a lot to make that field of open glass look like, you know, tall grasses, etc. I'm working on the horse now, and tomorrow I will start in on this, the victim here and the Samaritan. So that's the way it works. So when all the painting is done on a window, it next goes to our kilns. And then we have 3 kilns here, medium, small, and large, and they all fire with propane just like a barbecue. And these kilns come to us from the Netherlands. We can't get any more of them. They're extinct now. So we take good care of these. We have a large hood that exhausts the fumes straight out the roof. And we put the pieces of glass on these trays here, close the kiln up, and take it up to the melting point of the glass, which only takes about 15 minutes. It fires with infrared heat. And in 15 minutes, it gets to about 1200 degrees, at which point that vitreous paint that we put on, the line work, the shading, all of it sinks into the surface of the glass, and it's there forever. There's no getting it off. That's why you can go to churches in Europe and see windows that are hundreds of years old. I think the oldest is from the year, maybe around the year 900 in Augsburg, and it still has paint on it. So about the only thing that can threaten windows and the painting on them is like condensation or water dripping on them, et cetera. But really the painting is there forever. So now when the pieces are fired, the paint is all on them. And you can see here, these pieces are all heavily painted, but when the paint is on them, they look black until it goes up in a window. So here's one of my associates, and he's putting together this huge 6-foot circle, obviously Our Lady of Guadalupe. I'm not sure where this project is going, but he's adding the lead around every piece of glass. And here's a strip of the lead here. It looks like aluminum. It's very shiny when it's new, and we need it to be shiny because otherwise we couldn't solder it. We don't want it to tarnish. We need it to be bright like this. And you say, why do you need lead? Isn't there something else you can use? And the shorter answer is no. Why do they make violins out of spruce and maple? Well, it's the case that people have tried different things to make a violin with, and nothing works as well. We don't like the sound as much. And we now know what it takes to make a violin. You can keep on trying for the rest of the time, but nothing will ever equal it. And nothing will ever be able to go between the pieces of glass without breaking them, have a flexible strength that can last a century, which is important, and be soft on the glass. That's really the most important thing, that we can wrap it around all these pieces of glass and not break them. You couldn't do that with any other metal. Many people take up stained glass for a hobby. You probably know somebody that has done this. They do that with copper foil mostly, and that's what you would make like a Tiffany lamp out of, but it's not suitable for a window, because for a window, we need a flexible strength, because it's part of the skin of a building. A stained glass window is. It's going to suffer heat in the summer and cold in the winter, and it needs to have a flexible strength to it, and the lead affords us that. So let's move on. Okay, so now that we've had that primer, let's go back and start talking about stained glass. So this is a window made by the FX Zettler company, Francis Xavier Zettler. And this window was installed in Our Lady of the Rosary, which was off of City Avenue years ago, and a gorgeous parish, but it's no longer, there's not enough Catholics there to support this community anymore. So we have been working with the Archdiocese of Philadelphia as well as Allentown and Camden, and we help them find homes for these stained glass windows, and we relocate them. So these windows here, the whole collection went to a new St. Ambrose Church in the Diocese of Arlington. So we took this window out and took it all apart and put it all back together again and installed it in this brand new church in Arlington, Virginia. But you can see this, how gorgeous this is, the draftsmanship. If I can zoom in a little here, it's absolutely spectacular, the draftsmanship. Now, this is from 1889, so this is pretty early stuff, but this is FX Zettler, Francis Xavier Zettler. Now, this is a Munich school window. So what do I mean by Munich school? The Gothic revival came to the United States from England. People were tired after the Reformation and the Enlightenment, and they really wanted some of the mystery of Catholicism back in their lives again. And the Gothic revival took hold in England, started with Gothic novels, and then people started building Gothic mansions. And before you knew it, they were building Gothic churches again. And it felt like this was a more godly style. If you want to have a bank building, that's okay if it's got columns out front like a Greek temple, but that's a pagan style. If you want to have something godly, the pointed arches point to heaven. It seemed a more natural style. So at that point in England, all the new churches they were building, and they were building 1,000 new churches in England in the second half of the 19th century. And all of them were going to be Gothic buildings. And whatever was hot in England came across to the United States on the next boat. The first Gothic building in the United States is Eastern State Penitentiary, believe it or not. That's the first Gothic building in the United States. And that's in the 18th century. The first Gothic church was an Episcopal church called St. James the Less, not that far from here. It's close to Laurel Hill Cemetery, but that's the first Gothic church in the United States. So when you think of it, it's a completely foreign concept to us to have a Gothic building in the United States. If you're talking about the Gothic period, like the Middle Ages, the 13th, 12th, 13th, 14th century, architecture in the United States at that time was wigwams and teepees and that sort of thing. There was no Gothic architecture. So how do we get Gothic architecture? It was imported here as a completely plastic style that came from England. And now when you look around Philadelphia and every city, every town in the United States, the bank buildings are all look like Roman and Greek temples, but the churches are Gothic or Romanesque. So this is FX Zettler and it's Munich school. And in Munich, they started making stained glass windows for this market, really. They gained the imprimatur of a pope at the time, and their business just took off. And it was a lot like getting your electronics from Southeast Asia. It was not only better stained glass, but it was cheaper too. And it really took off. And that's why most of the stained glass in Philadelphia is Munich school stained glass, at least in the Catholic churches. So they started making these windows looking just like paintings, essentially. They're paintings on glass and made exactly the same way I described to you earlier. It's made exactly the same way. Here's another Zettler window. And this is at Catholic University. We restored all of these too. And you can see large pieces of glass, beautifully painted in outstanding draftsmanship. Now, here is a French window that is right up the street from you and I apologize for the miserable photograph. This is the one photograph I took offline today, but this is a French window, but it's still the Munich style because the pieces of glass are large and they rely heavily on the painting. Look at Christ's lap here. His knee to his waist is all one piece of glass that is beautifully painted, and it conveys the idea of a thigh and a lap just perfectly. So this is Christ in the house of Martha and Mary. Down here, there's this blue willow vase that I just love, which I'm sure they didn't have in the 1st century AD, but I love it anyway. But that's a French window, but it's still Munich school, not because of the location it came from, but because of the style. Okay, here is a window. This was Incarnation Church in Philadelphia. And this window was relocated now to the new chapel at Christendom College in Front Royal, Virginia. It's a very large window. And notice how dramatic it is, these dark shadows, just like the last window we saw at the previous picture, 2 back from Catholic U. Deep shadows here. And I think the Germans wanted this to be more like a painting, and they were hiding the lead work in the deep shadows here. And so where the glass is lighter, you can see the lead work more around the halos and here. But for the rest of it, they do a pretty good job of hiding the lead. It just feels like an enormous painting. And this window is very large. It's probably 12 feet across. Okay, now switch gears. This is also going on at exactly the same time. This is Valley Forge Chapel, the Washington Memorial Chapel in Valley Forge. Maybe some of you have seen it. If you haven't, I recommend you stopping there sometime when you're out of the city. It is worth a day trip to see this gem. The Gothic Revival was a completely different style in stained glass, and it relied on small pieces of glass that were meant to look like medieval. So when you look at this and you say, this is just like the windows at Chartres Cathedral, which is what we're looking at now. Lots of small pieces, all bright, less involved in the painting. It's not attempting to be realistic or anything like that. It's a much different style of glass that was attempting to replicate the medieval style of window making. So there's Chartres Cathedral. The windows at the Washington Memorial Chapel are completely about the Revolution, the founding of the United States, the history of a country, and all the founding fathers. So here is George Washington receiving the surrender of Cornwallis at Yorktown. So you can see how many pieces of glass there are in this window, how busy it is, how small the pieces there are. Let's see. Okay, this is a favorite of mine because this eagle here, this is one of the first windows I ever removed as an apprentice in the 1970s. So it was particularly satisfying for me to go back and 45 years later, restore these windows in this chapel and do a really good job of it. That's another lecture altogether. But take a look at this eagle here. His feathers, every single feather is a separate piece of glass. It's a very different idea of what stained glass should be from the Zettler and Munich school windows, where they're relying on larger pieces of glass that are beautifully painted to create the illusion of shallow space. This is very different, much more graphic. They're celebrating the lead. They're taking every opportunity. Just look at all the various colors you see in these wings. Every time they had a different piece of glass, they changed the color slightly to be this subtle mix. And I just think this is a tremendous tour de force of glass selecting and window making. So this style of Gothic revival is going on at exactly the same time as the Munich school windows and going to the same market in the United States. The windows at the Valley Forge Chapel were all made by DeScenzo. Nicola DeScenzo started out as a mural painter and quickly captured, he really was captured by stained glass, spent a lot of time in France, and came back and started his own stained glass studio in Philadelphia. And when the church, in the 1920s, when they built the Washington Memorial Chapel, they were looking around for an artist to make their windows for them. Now, an Episcopal church like St. Mark's and on Locust Street or Trinity, most of their windows are from England. The English style, they like that very much. Episcopal would make a lot of sense. But at Valley Forge, they could hardly hire an Englishman to make windows to celebrate the Revolution. Yes. So they settled on Nicola DeScenzo, and here's his ad for windows: church memorials in stained glass. Now, back again to Munich style, but this is a French window. This was in St. Edward the Confessor at 8th and York Street. Again, another church that was closed. We took all these windows out, and there was about 85 stained glass windows, and they were enormous windows, some of them 22 feet tall, in the transepts and behind the altar. And I didn't know where we were going to go with these windows. I offered them to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and they said, we'd love to have them, but we have no place we could ever display them. And then the phone rang one day, and it was a church, a priest who was going to start a church in North Augusta, South Carolina. And the church was going to be called St. Edward's. So he took the lock, stock, and barrel, virtually the entire collection of windows, went to a church called St. Edward's, which I thought was a miracle in itself. So all the St. Edward's windows are now in a church called St. Edward's, and it had the life story of St. Edward the Confessor, who built Westminster Abbey. But it's all Munich style like this. Look at this, compare this with the Valley Forge windows we just saw, where they were looking for ways to add more pieces of glass in the window. Here, this torso of Christ, this is one enormous piece of glass here. It's probably 30 inches long right there. And it's heavily painted, but it's all one single sheet of glass there, red flash. Exactly the same glass that DeScenzo's using. He's just using it in a very different way. So we've got these different aesthetics going on at the same time. Incidentally, an interesting story about this, the architect who built St. Edward the Confessor built it in a French Gothic style. Excuse me. I'm getting over a cold that one of my loyal employees shared with me. So Edward the Confessor with a Norman Gothic style, gorgeous building, still there. Unfortunately, it's no longer a Catholic church. And the architect that built it wanted the pastor to buy windows that were the Gothic revival style, like DeScenzo, like Valley Forge. But the pastor said, I want Munich style. And this is what he ended up with. And the architect was so angry about this that he vowed he would never show up in this church during the day again, so he wouldn't have to look at these awful windows. Okay, now up the street from you is St. Mark's, and this is one of their windows. This is from just after the Civil War, maybe 1870s, but this is an English window. Look how austere it is compared to the French and the German windows, not nearly so dramatic and flamboyant, much more austere feeling about this. Here's another
St. Mark's.
From St. Mark's. This is gorgeous stuff. I love English windows and the delicate painting in them. They're really rich and worth seeing. But Episcopal churches are a very different matter. They would have just diamond lights in all their windows. And then as someone died and left them money, they would donate it in the form of a window to the church. So the donor would be part of picking who made the windows. So in a church like St. Mark's or Trinity on Rittenhouse, you can find half a dozen or maybe even a dozen different artists in a single church. Whereas St. Patrick's, all the windows were there from the very beginning, made by the same studio. But Episcopal churches are very different because it's much more donor-oriented and donor-driven. And they would weigh in and be part of the decisions about who was going to make each window and what the subject matter would be. And there's always a dedication at the bottom of the window to the glory of God and loving memory, et cetera, et cetera. Here is a window from the Unitarian Church that is about 22nd and Chestnut. It was a Frank Furness building. Indeed, his father was the pastor of this Unitarian Church. And I included this just because I think the painting in this is so gorgeous, this delicate painting. Now, this is the drapery of some saint, but you can see how the subtlety, the English glass they're using here, it's thicker here and a deeper color. As the glass gets thinner, it gets lighter. They've used some silver nitrate for this subtle gold staining. But look, there's like 14 pieces of glass here. They could have made this out of one piece of glass. This area of glass is no bigger than your computer screen. Might be a square foot or more. But they've made it into 14 pieces because they liked the lead and they wanted to celebrate it and have an opportunity to do all this subtle selecting here. So again, we've got English style painting, very, very different from the Munich style. So add to that mix Louis Comfort Tiffany. This is Ardmore Presbyterian Church, and this is something that's going on at exactly the same time as the Munich School, as the Gothic Revival, a very different aesthetic altogether. And some people loved this and other people hated this. They said, what in the world do I need a landscape? I should be seeing saints and angels and I'm seeing a landscape. If I wanted to see a landscape, I'd leave the glass clear and I'd look out the window. So it's a completely different style of an aesthetic about what should be in a church window. Notice here in this area, what they've done is they've added many layers of glass here. This window might be 5 layers of glass thick. They didn't paint on the windows. They added layers and layers of glass to get the kind of subtlety. And what they've done here is they've included a horizon line starting here, but when it gets to here, they've put it behind another layer of glass. So they've taken a large sheet of glass here that might be, 2.5 feet wide, and they've covered over the stained glass below it. And that textured clear glass on the inside obscures that horizon line and gives you the illusion of great depth going away far into the distance. So I just think this is a tour de force, and I love all these styles, but people felt very strongly in those days. They either loved these things.
Okay, I forgot, I'm in the middle of the Zoom thing.
Excuse me? Was there a question there? I missed it.
You can continue. I think
All right, here we go. So, okay, so all these three things, all these three styles are happening simultaneously. Okay, so here now, back to FX Zettler. And the Zettler Company was started in the 18th century. And Francis Xavier Zettler was an artist in Munich, and he was in the stained glass business. He apprenticed for another company, Franz Meyer, Mayer, married the boss's daughter. He married Meyer's daughter and became very high up in the Meyer company. But somewhere along the line, they had a big disagreement, and Francis Zettler went out on his own and started a competing company practically across the street in Munich. And both of these companies had hundreds of people working for them making stained glass. And the stained glass they were making wasn't for Germany, because if you've been to Germany, they've got either a Catholic or a Lutheran church on every corner. They don't need any more stained glass. The marketplace for them was the United States and Canada and Australia and Brazil. They were making windows for the New World, and they couldn't make them fast enough. So each one of these two companies had hundreds of people working for them, and they were not alone. I told you about studios in France doing exactly the same style work. And then we had companies in Innsbruck, Austria, who were doing exactly the same thing. And they were all sending windows to the United States because we couldn't build churches fast enough. And they were filling them all up with beautiful stained glass. Now, you've seen all the Zettler windows I showed you so far from Catholic U and other churches that we relocated the windows from Philadelphia. And they're all in that painterly style. But now, this is my theory. I have a feeling that Zettler realized that the Gothic revival was a marketplace and a taste that they could not compete with. And they wanted to offer something that would look like that and have a different style. In other words, not the very painterly style, not the Munich style, but something more like Gothic revival. So they invented what they were calling their mosaic style, mosaic windows right here. So this is an ad from the 1920s, and it actually postdates your windows. Your windows came first before this ad. This photograph that they used for this ad were of the windows that were made for Transfiguration Church in Southwest Philadelphia, another church that is not even, doesn't exist anymore. It was knocked down many years ago now. All these windows were sent far and wide. There were so many windows and they were so large. We sent them, I mean, some of them are in Texas now, but 4 of them went to a new Catholic church in suburban Philadelphia out in Chester Springs, St. Elizabeth. Some of you may have seen that church. And they have 4 of these original windows. And here they are. So you see this figure of Christ here. That's the ad. That's it right there. Okay, there's Christ coming down from the cross. But look how busy these windows are. No more of that big pieces of glass. If this was the Munich style from earlier days, they would have made this into one big piece of glass and painted it very heavily. Instead, it's hundreds of pieces of glass. Indeed, there's got to be 10,000 pieces of glass in this window. It's so busy and so heavy. These were almost 5 feet across. These are large windows. And these 4 were supposed to go into that church, but the architect decided it would look better with 3. So without telling the church, he only made 3 holes in the wall. So one of these windows went somewhere else, unfortunately. But they sure look nice restored. They were completely taken apart and put back together again. Here's a close-up of them. And again, you can see how busy they are. And now, do you see the resemblance to the St. Patrick's windows? how busy they are, how busy the style is, how many pieces of glass, and the more graphic painting that we see here. Here's another example. Here's the figure of Christ and how many pieces of glass are. And we saw earlier on how this would have been one single piece of glass, all heavily painted, gorgeously painted, but meant to be an illusion of a real figure standing in space in light. Here, this is meant to be decorative. It's an excuse to have all these various reds together. And you know, in person, they look much better. There's no comparison. Just like this, the photographs I'm showing you of your own windows are nothing like your real windows in person. So let me give that caveat right off the bat, that I can never apologize enough for the photographs, even though they're the best photographs we can offer. Here again, many pieces of glass, much more graphic treatment. And these small figures very much resemble the figures in St. Patrick's. These are from the 1920s, so this is about a little more than a decade after your windows at St. Patrick's. Okay, so here we are with your windows, and you can see how similar they are. I'm not sure, I think this is a picture taken before the restoration. But when it comes to restoration, an important thing to understand is that there was no stained glass restoration in the United States, for the good reason that there wasn't stained glass old enough to require it. The oldest stained glass in the United States is after the Civil War, but the vast majority comes from the great age of Catholic or church building in the United States of any denomination. And we're talking about from 1900 through the Second World War, but really concentrated in the 20s and 30s when most of the great churches were built. And there really wasn't a need for anybody to repair anything, because the windows at that point were young. And by the time you get to like the 1960s, some of these windows are only 40 years old. The first time the windows at Valley Forge started to need work was in the 1960s, and the windows were only 40 years old. Well, that's like a teenager for stained glass. That's not very old at all. But the problem was that they were doing things exactly the same way they did them in Europe. But in Europe, they set windows very differently. When I made a window to go into a church in Normandy, I hired a French studio to install it for me, and they installed it with mortar, like cement. And that's how they sealed it into the stone cavity in this 800-year-old church. I couldn't do that in the United States because our swings of temperature, we get much hotter and much colder. So our windows flex and expand and contract to a much higher degree than they do in Europe. And the windows at Valley Forge started to buckle right away, and they didn't know what to do about that. So they started adding more reinforcing bars to them, rebuilding them with heavier leads, and they were just making a mess of them, but they didn't know how to solve the problem. Now we know the goal isn't to make them stronger, but to make them more flexible. And we have sophisticated sealants like exactly what we're using on Valley Forge and St. Patrick's. We seal them in place with something that is flexible, that will allow them to expand and contract over time, so they will never bulge as they always used to do in the United States because of our more extreme weather. So just to give you an example of the fact that there was no stained glass restoration, here I've returned us to Valley Forge again, and William Penn here is shaking hands on a ship with somebody, and the Willett studio took this window out to work on it, and they took it back to the studio, but in the process of taking it out, they had broken a couple of heads. They broke one here and they broke one here, which is not uncommon if you're trying to get stained glass out of a place where it's impacted into a limestone setting. The only way to do that is to chisel it out with a hammer and a chisel out of the limestone, chisel away all the putty. When you do that, you're going to break some glass. There's no way around it. But these two heads, one in the corner here and one here were buried into the limestone tracery here, and they got broken. So when it got back to the studio, they took the piece of glass and cut a new piece to fit this area and said to a painter, we need a head painted for this to replace the one that was broken. So the painter was probably one of the older guys I apprenticed with, and he had probably apprenticed at the DiCenzo studio and knew exactly what to do. So he painted a head for them and they inserted it in the window. Okay, so 40 years later, we get the window out and we go to restore it. And we're looking at the archival photographs from the University of Pennsylvania archives and the Athenaeum. And we're looking at the photographs and we said, you know what? That figure here isn't a guy, it's a woman. So we had the archival photographs and we could tell from the original cartoons that DiCenzo drew what this head was supposed to look like. So that's the after, that's the before. So it originally looked like this. It got restored in quotes, and this was the head that was there. We extracted that and replaced it with one looking like originally it looked from the original cartoons that DiCenzo drew. This one too, you can't see it here, but this was a male head too, and it was a female. I mean, really, she's holding some wool that she's spinning here as well. So no one was really paying attention, but you get the idea that in those days, in the 1960s, there wasn't a school of stained glass restoration. If something was broken, they fixed it, and that was it. Let me see if I can get this to work again. There we go. Okay. So now here I am up on a ladder at your windows at St. Patrick's, and you can see that the bottom border here of one of the windows, this is like the first window on the sunny side, the south side, the first one as you walk in the front doors. And this mechanism here was part of an elaborate system that opened all the vents. The bottom sections of all the windows and the very tops were vents that opened with an elaborate mechanical system, which never worked very well. And of course, it's been discarded long since. But you can see daylight pouring through here where this bottom border folded. And that is, again, a factor of the expansion and contraction. This window wanted to expand, but it was trapped in a steel vent frame that was meant to open. And being steel, there was no room for it to expand or contract. And when it expanded, it just kind of turned into a washboard and started to buckle. So when we get the windows out of the building, out of the terracotta window frames, we bring them back to the studio and we take them apart underwater. And this is a special room we have that is sealed off from the rest of the building, and it's got its own HVA system. And these tanks we fill up with water and take the windows apart underwater. And the reason is so that we can save ourselves from being toxed out with all the lead involved. The water leaves here and goes through an elaborate system that will filter out all the lead. And believe me, the water leaves cleaner than when it showed up from the city. Here's one of your windows. Now, all this along the edge here, this white powdery stuff is lead oxide, and that is rather toxic. They sealed these windows in place with putty, and everybody knows what putty is, right? Well, do you really? It's powdered chalk and vegetable oil. That's what putty is. And that's all there was from the time of the Romans up until about 1975. That's all there was to seal a window in place with. So they sealed these windows with putty, and the oil reacted with the lead and it oxidized it. And that's why you get this white efflorescence around those, which is rather toxic stuff. And we don't
interested? You interested?
So while my guys are out there working on these, they're wearing surgical gloves. They've got a Tyvek suit on from head to toe. which they throw out at lunchtime and replace. They're wearing masks that are very sophisticated to filter out any lead. And here you can see we've got a vacuum that is meant to extract the lead and not distribute it, not blowing it around the building. So we have to be very careful. I have a nurse that shows up several times a year and draws blood from all our employees just so that we can all know where we stand as far as the lead goes. The windows are not any danger to people in the pews, but when we take them out, we have to be very careful for our own health. Here's another window, and you can see it's kind of collapsing and falling apart at the edges here. Again, the white oxidized lead there. Now, this is a shot taken in one of our tanks, and this window is underwater. These are reflections of fluorescent fixtures overhead, reflecting in the shallow pool of water. So they're taking this window apart, and you can see here here's the glass, but this is just the lead matrix left behind after they've taken the pieces out. So what they've done is they've taken a very sharp knife and they've shaved off the top layer of lead, allowing them to just pluck all these pieces out. And then each piece has to be cleaned individually all around the edge and on all the surfaces with little scrubbing, the green scrubbing things you use on your pots and pans and razor blades. Every single piece in every section of every window gets cleaned individually that way. Again, it's a good job to do with headphones on and listening to music or a good novel, because it's very tedious. The amount of time involved in doing this is voluminous, to be sure. Here, another view of the same window, and they've gotten that far. And here's the razor blades they're using and these brushes, these bronze brushes, and they've got the rest of this to do. And here is the matrix. Now look at all that dirt left behind. So that's why your windows, if you notice how bright your restored windows look, this is why all this dirt was left behind. The accumulation of many decades, a century of dirt accumulated from coal fire furnaces and industrial fumes and car exhaust, etc., all settling on the windows. Not to mention candles and millions of people besides. So let's see if I've got any more slides. Okay, so here's a window that has been restored, and this is one of your windows put back together again, and the lead looks like aluminum again. They put it in a window and took pictures of it. I didn't know I was going to give this talk, so I had to ask my employees. I said, has anybody taken any pictures while we were restoring these windows? And some said, oh yeah, I've got some. So these are all courtesy of my employees who took these pictures as they were putting these things back together again and taking them apart too. The lead is soldered at every joint. So you can see the bright stuff here is the solder, and every single joint is soldered on both sides of the window. Soldered, 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 soldered. A big soldering iron gets all these joints throughout both sides of the window, and then it gets flipped over and waterproofed on both sides. The amount of time, the amount of labor that goes into this is just endless. I liken it often to a bottle of wine. You say, what could make a bottle of wine worth $50? And then when you see all the work that goes into it, you say, how does anybody make any money selling that bottle of wine? It's the same way with the stained glass. Here's another one. I don't know. This is, I guess this is St. Paul. I'm just guessing, but
Yes, that's correct. St. Paul.
I think so. And you can see how bright the lead looks. Now, when they waterproof this, the lead takes on a pewter look and darkens a lot, as you can see in the church. Here's one more. Very graphic painting. Now, here's a special case that I'm happy to share with you. This is one of your windows across the front of the building. It's a Tiffany window. This is Lewis Comfort Tiffany made these three windows, Faith, Hope, and Charity. And we took this out, took it apart, and put it back together again and put it back in. And here it is restored, looking great. But then when they took this window out to restore it, they noticed that there was another window a stained glass window all by itself on the outside, a completely different window. But it wasn't the opalescent glass you see on the inside. It was all clear glass. What's that about? Here it is in the studio, completely clear. And it's rippled glass, all these like 5 or 6 different textures of glass. And we had no idea looking at this from the outside. On the inside, it says St. Patrick here, glory be to the Son. I'm sure the other ones say Father and Holy Spirit. But here it is. Now you can read this one from the outside, because if you looked at the stained glass from the outside and the text was facing the inside, you couldn't read it. So they made a completely separate window to go on the outside. And how they did it, I don't know, because these round windows used to open. They opened for ventilation. I don't know how they did it. Here it is. Here it is on a bench. And I think these bars here are original. Somebody added these because it probably started to buckle. These smaller ones here were added later on. These bars are original. So we took this apart and put it all back together again. And here it is. Now see, the lettering isn't painted on. There's no paint in the Tiffany window. These are cut out of sheets of lead, given a little rounded dimension by pushing on them and kind of, making them more like jewelry in a way. So they've given some shape to this lead and then soldered it onto the window. And that's the way the lettering is done. And where these were too messed up here's one that's fallen off. We had to get sheet lead, which we had anyway, and cut these out with an X-Acto knife and replace some of these letters. Let's see that again. I think that's really interesting. Before restoration, after restoration, the outside window restored and reinstalled. That shocked us. We had never seen that before. A completely separate window. And you see these nice anchors here that you don't see in the colored windows so much, but there they are. And finally, to close, here are my loyal employees out there in the hot sun, replacing all the storm glazing on the outside, thanks to your generous donor. This is restored, new storm glazing. This one is the way we found it. And you can see half the pieces are broken, cracked, plastic. So all that's going and being replaced with brand new plate glass. And with that, I will end my talk here, and I will give one last thought to finish here, and that is that I would be happy to host a tour from the church. Anytime you would like to come to the studio in Germantown, it's only about a 20-minute drive from St. Patrick's. And we have tourists go through the studio all the time. Every month we have a tour go through. I've had school groups, busloads of people. So you're more than welcome to come and see us restoring your windows.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. That was really fascinating.
Well, thank you.
Do you have any time for a little Q&A?
Sure, of course.
Okay, wonderful. So questions. Just make sure you unmute yourself before you ask a question, if you're muted.
Well, we gained quite a crowd here.
Joe, my name is Kevin. That was incredible.
I'll break the ice with one, Joe. Thank you. It was a fascinating presentation. You mentioned some of the studios in Germany with, I think you said a couple or several hundred people working there at the time. They're, basically making all this glass to send to the New World. I'm an engineer, and I think of kind of in a studio like that, you've got artists who came up with, here's the story that's going to be told, the style, the technique, if that's the right word, how it's going to be done. And then there's the craftsman whose job is to, cut that glass, put it together, maybe paint some lines. Is that the way it divides up, or is it a couple hundred artists and they're kind of in there doing their own thing? They've been given the story You just have to
Yes,
make.
well-
How does all that work?
You would have people who were more the fine artist who had gone through a long career as an artist in art school in Germany, and they could really draw. They were excellent. And, you know, all these windows, there's not somebody named Zettler or Meyer painting the windows. It was, it's a team of people. So let me grab something here to show you.
This would be an excellent.
So long before you begin working with glass, you start with a design. So I don't know, is this, can you see this?
Yep, let me change.
Okay, so this is the design for a new Catholic church that isn't even started yet in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's a Vietnamese church. And I invited them. I said, you know, I could do some designs that had a slight Asian flavor to them, a little bit that only you would notice. They said, no, we want it to look as Western as possible. So here it is. All the aisle windows are going to look like this. There's 18 of these. There's 28 clear story windows, some rose windows, a big ascension on the front. So everything starts with a watercolor design that I or one of my other artists come up with. Here's another one for Washington. This is Eve and the Serpent. Okay.
Wow.
That's how things start. Now, they commissioned me to make a window of Eve with the serpent, but it couldn't have any nudity in the window, which I found perplexing because of all the stories in the Bible, Old and New Testament, it's the only story that absolutely requires nudity. Okay. Before the fall. Okay. So,
Sure.
so this is like my fourth try at this. And I'm hoping Bishop Burbage down there in Arlington says yes to this, because if he doesn't, I'm going to tell them they've got to pick a new subject. So I do this design and then I hand it over to my IT director. He scans it in high resolution and he puts it into his computer. And then he takes CAD, which you know intimately, I'm sure, and he matches these two softwares together, the artwork in Photoshop and CAD together. So we know it's going to fit. If we send windows to Alaska, to the Cathedral of Anchorage, we know they're going to hook up with frames that were made in Jamaica, New York, and they're all going to fit perfectly, which they did. You know, unfortunately, somebody put a rock through one of them a few weeks ago, and I've got a window here that we've got to ship all the way back to Anchorage because somebody put a rock through it. And there's nobody between here and Anchorage that could fix the thing.
Sure.
And it was a gorgeous settler window. So that's the way it starts. And then it jumps into cutting the patterns and the glass selecting and the whole process I showed you. So if you come to the studio, and again, I'm extending that invitation, you will see this process up close.
Awesome. Thank you.
More questions?
Joe, my name is Kevin. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Joe, are you familiar with what happened at St. Paul's Presbyterian here in Philadelphia when it was demolished and salvaged? Does that ring a bell?
Oh, I don't know. That's happening so much. I don't know. Fill me in. I may know something about it.
So when it was contracted to be demolished, they weren't aware that the majority of the stained glass windows were Tiffany.
Oh, okay.
And so
I know this story. Yeah.
Pardon me?
I know this story.
Yeah.
Took the windows out.
Yeah. They've since taken the windows out and they're selling them. But I was just curious if you had worked on any of those windows or
Well, we took them out for the contractor,
you did.
which is different from to the Archdiocese of Philadelphia's credit. It was Cardinal Bevilacqua who decided that the churches were not going to be sold with the stained glass in them. and we're having the same fight with the seminary right now. But to finish your question, yes, I knew about that, and we took them out. And yes, the windows were made by Tiffany, but you know, there's Tiffany and there's Tiffany. It was not that special a window. It was a rose window.
Mhm.
Many petals going around a circle like the spokes of a wheel. And the window was virtually worthless without a wooden frame exactly like the one it was in, which would be about a 10-foot circle made out of wood, finely crafted with all these spokes between these sections of stained glass. So the sections of stained glass were like pie pieces that came out of this wooden frame. If you don't have the frame, the window is practically worthless. So somebody released it to the news trying to drive up the price of this. And then the New York Times picked it up and said, oh, Tiffany window. And then the price went through the roof. And somebody thought they were really lucky to get this Tiffany window for this enormous price. They can't do anything with it until they make a frame to match the one that was there. And that would probably cost them as much again as they paid for the stained glass window. So the whole thing is more a story about promotion and advertising than it is about stained glass in a way. But that's a story that is being repeated every year throughout Philadelphia and lots of dioceses all over the United States. And some have done a better job of this than others. And as I said, Cardinal Bevilacqua said that we were not going to sell the churches with the stained glass in them. So we've relocated thousands of windows that used to be in churches in Philadelphia, Camden, and Allentown, all over the United States, Brazil, Australia. We found homes for all these windows, so it's a tremendous success. We've got a separate website that links to our website called the Sacred Window Rescue Project. So when they close a church, we go in and photograph those windows with real, high, big Canon camera. And then we bring them in, and it's much more work. We put them in the computer, and we do a lot of work to clean them up and make them look great. Sometimes we're combining elements of 2 or 3 shots of the same window because your eye can see it better than the camera can. So sometimes it takes 3 shots from a camera to make a photograph as good as what your eye sees. So we put these all on a website so an architect in Arizona can focus on a set of windows and start working with us and then build a church literally around the windows. A set of 40 windows from Ascension Church in Olney went to the new cathedral in Raleigh, North Carolina. Bishop Burbage was the new bishop there. He wanted to build a cathedral. He remembered these windows. He wanted the windows from MBS, but they were already taken by all his buddies. So they all built churches with those windows. So he got the windows from Ascension. We took them all apart, put them all back together again. And by the time the church was built, the windows fit perfectly because the frame maker, the architect, and the studio are all on the same page sharing CAD files together, and it all worked beautifully. And they've got 40 more windows, and we're still making them for that place. Then they moved him to Arlington, and he did it all over again, but this time we had to make all new windows for him. Of course, I'm the last one to come on board after they make all their plans. They say, hey, what about stained glass? And they call me and say, can you have this done for our dedication? So that's a second Bishop Burbage Cathedral, this time in Arlington. But we've relocated windows all over the world, really. And it's been a tremendous success story, but other dioceses have not done a good job of this. And a lot of the scandals and money problems are driving this. So a diocese, not to be named, will say, well, yes, we have a website where people can look at these windows and help find a new home for them. But then you'll find exactly the same window from a New England diocese on eBay for sale, exactly the very window. And that's a real shame. That should not happen. We don't want to see the Blessed Virgin be a barback somewhere. Once you lose control over the windows, that's what can happen. So the Archdiocese about 5 years ago I got in a car once with Father Gill, and he said to me, "Oh, by the way, Joe, we want to give you all our stained glass." And I'm like, "What?" I didn't know what he was talking about, but I soon realized that once they were going to sell the seminary, that was our storage facility. They had no place to put them, and they were up to here with moving them, caring for them, storing them. It was expensive. So they said, "We're going to give them all to you." And I didn't know where to go with them either. So I started looking around for rental space, but it was going to be thousands of dollars a month to rent a space big enough to hold all the surplus stained glass they had. So what we did was we bought several 40-foot shipping containers, and they're in my parking lot, and they're alarmed, and they're chock full of stained glass right now. And that's where they all are. And every month, another window goes somewhere in the United States. We find a home for it, whether it's a new high school somewhere or a church or a private chapel. And I also convinced them, they never used to sell them to private individuals. And I said, you know what? These people and their families were good enough to pay for these windows in the first place. That's where the money came for. You mean to tell me they're not good enough to get these windows when they don't have a home? So they said, "Oh, okay." So I started letting individuals, and you're Catholic or you're not. You either get envelopes in the mail or you don't, So if they can prove that they're honest to God Catholics, then they're allowed to buy these windows. And that's been a real success too. Not many, but you'd be surprised how many people are building private chapels for themselves, maybe sometimes just converting a room in their house. But I've got some clients. I don't know what this gentleman does. He's a good bit younger than me, but he must do it very well because they have a huge ranch in Virginia, like in horse country around UVA. And they are building a stone chapel with a steeple, like a bell tower, and a dozen aisle windows and an altar window. And we're going to make all new stained glass for this place. And it's the size of a small chapel. It'd seat about 20 people. So it's not unheard of that people are doing this sort of thing. And God bless them. Any other questions?
I think it's wonderful that you're taking these windows, caring for them, and finding a home.
Yeah, it's a great success story. And we took a lot of heat from the Inquirer and people saying, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing this. They should be staying where they are." But you know what? Like I closed my mother's church and my father's church was St. Aloysius in Gray's Ferry. And it was a completely German parish from top to bottom. And the building was in perfect shape. Now, a lot of them we see, the plaster's falling down and they're in really bad, dangerous shape. And the Episcopalians have this problem too. I mean, they have this same problem with a big church on 19th Street, whose name I won't bore you with trying to think of the name of it now. But they have all these same problems, a plaster falling down and the building gets condemned and there's nothing they can do about it. Allentown Diocese the same way. But the church my father belonged to, Aloysius, St. Al's, was in perfect shape. It was tight as a drum. The windows were great. The roof didn't leak. Everything was perfect. The only problem was there wasn't a Catholic around for miles. None, anywhere. Not only did no one speak German anymore, there weren't any Catholics there. So what were they going to do? So I was in there and taking a survey of the windows originally, and it was like August, like really super hot. I was in there with 3 or 4 of my guys, and we were all sweating. And there was an elderly woman in there, and she lived just up the street in a row house. And she came in with 2 big pitchers of ice water for us. I thought, how nice is that? And I asked her name, and she told me her name was Mrs. Poise. And I said, that name sounds familiar. And here she knew my dad. And I took my cell phone, I called my father. I put him on the phone with this Mrs. Poise. They had a very nice conversation because they grew up down the street from each other on the same block. So these stories were repeated throughout the city in Polish, Italian, German, Irish parishes. Our Queen of Peace was so close to St. Aloysius in Grace Ferry that if you were a really good golfer, you could hit a ball from one church to the other. That's how close they were. And I said to my dad, I was in Queen of Peace. I think it was King of Peace. I was in there today. I really wasn't that impressed with the place. And he had like a blank stare on his face. I said, you mean to tell me you were never in there? It was a block away. He said, no, we didn't go there. We weren't allowed to go there. It was like an invisible line you didn't cross. That was Italian, and this was the German block, and you didn't go there. So that's the history of Philadelphia. It's fascinating, but it's all changed now. And thankfully, this, people think, oh, it's a dying art and nobody does this anymore. And boy, it's a shame. Those windows are all going to crash and burn. Not so. In the South and the West, that's where all our work is. I must have I couldn't remember now all the projects I have going on in Virginia right now. In fact, if I don't get some of them done, it's going to be the witness protection program for me. There's so many projects just in the state of Virginia alone. And then the whole rest of the South, they're building Catholic churches everywhere. Well, the Catholics didn't used to be welcome there. In Portsmouth, there's a beautiful Catholic church there. And I was restoring all their windows. They told me, well, we had a church. They burned the first one down. And then we built a second one. They burned that one down too. But this one's got steel in it. And they're not going to burn this one down. And the reason they're not going to burn it down is because the Catholics are the mayor and the town council and everything else. They're very welcome.
Hi, Regina.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, my phone ringer was off.
It's okay. Joe.
No sweat.
Okay.
We've all had that happen. Any other questions before I let
you've
go?
actually answered one of my questions. I was a parishioner at Most Blessed Sacrament, MBS, 56
So was my wife.
and Chester. And that's where I received all my sacraments. My parents were married there. And I was going to ask whether you had any part of taking those out to go up to St. Bede the Venerable and to St. Joseph's and Downingtown. And I've been up to both of those churches to see not only the stained glass, but in St. Bede's, they took out everything. The baldacchino, the Stations of the Cross, everything is up there. And it just does my heart good to know that they weren't scattered all over the world, as you're saying, that could happen, and that they're so close by that we can still go and see it. For those of us who stood under that light,
It's
MBS
my
was the
original drawing.
largest school in the United States, not just the largest Catholic school. It was the biggest school.
Yeah, in the 1960s, there were over 3,500 students in that school. There were two large buildings, separate buildings, the Marian School and the Pius the 10th School, which were all part of that parish. And but that's how many. I think they had as many as, well, each class had 90 kids, and there was probably 5 or 6 of every grade level.
Every grade, yes. My wife went there, and when we started doing work for Bishop Burbage down in North Carolina in Charlotte, we went down for a fundraiser, and I was giving a talk like this there about the windows, etc. And Bishop Burbage looks at Rita and says, "You look familiar for some reason or other." It turns out that she played the organ for the children's mass on Sunday, and that's how he remembered her.
In the lower church.
It was an enormous parish, and the windows were just spectacular. They were made by another Munich school, a studio called George Boos, Boos. He also made the windows for Immaculate Conception in Germantown, which was another vast palace. Windows, all those windows at both those places have all found homes, and that the MBS windows are a real success because they
were so condensed rather than one go here and one go there. They're only in those two parishes, St. Joseph's and St. Bede's.
St. Joe's University got one of them.
Ah, okay.
Because it was a leftover, believe it or not, raising the daughter of Jarius. And I hope they do a good job with that. But yes, so St. Joseph's in Downingtown got, I think, 9 of them. And then they needed 9 more. And we had to start making windows to match the Munich windows, which is not an easy task.
Mhm.
So, but we had been doing this for so long, and we had, Holy Ghost prep when their windows, they had a fire, the roofers set the roof on fire, and the firemen came and smashed the windows out with axes. And they were Munich windows, and we had to convince the people at the school that we could replace Christ from the waist up in this window. We had to prove to them before we did the job that we could do this. And when we were done, they couldn't tell what was, they said, that piece looks funny. We said, well, that one's original, so they couldn't tell. So we've had this kind of experience. So the first thing we did, we took the windows that we put in St. Bede's and we copied those 3 and put those copies in St. Joseph's in Downingtown. And then they started wanting subjects that had never been done in the first place, like the death of Joseph. So we had to make completely new windows, but that was a
Do
fun
you know where the rose window from Most Blessed Sacrament ended up?
yes.
Because St. Bede's didn't.
It hasn't yet. I still have it. And I think we're talking with somebody, and I've got to talk to my IT director because it's still here. And I think we found somebody who wants it. And it's a really hard window to place. But it was David. It was in the choir, a lot of choir.
Yeah, the choir loft.
Or St. David or St. Cecilia, something musical like that. But we still have that. And we're very hopeful of finding a home for that last one.
Good. I'll have to keep in touch to find out where it went.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
But thank you very much for not only what you're doing for us tonight, but for the salvaging of all of these priceless pieces of glass from our city, and that even though many of them have gone far and wide, that they are restored and they are loved and they are going on to another generation and many generations to come. So thank you for that.
It's a labor of love, and most of the earliest and the best of them, Edward the Confessor, all the earliest ones that we took so much heat for when they closed them. The Archdiocese took a tremendous amount of heat, but there was nothing they could do about it. Most of those windows stayed in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia because we were still building them, going out to Chester County and north in Bucks County and west. We were still building new parishes, but once we got to the edge of the diocese, there was no more place to go with them anymore. We weren't building anymore. So that's when they started to go to Arizona and California and who knows where. I mean, from Pensacola to Anchorage and Brazil and Australia, we've sent windows. It's been a labor of love, and somebody's got to go and take them to Australia and to Anchorage and install the things. So it makes a lot of work for us, and we're happy to have it because it's very satisfying.
Hey,
Thank you.
Joe, quick question. You talked about the different colored glass or pieces of glass, and then also the paint. So I was wondering, is the paint always black, gray on the colored glass? Do you ever have colored paint?
Yes, because think of it as a charcoal drawing. It's like chiaroscuro. We're subtracting some of the light coming through the window, and the paint is almost like a silhouette, but it can be very thin and like shading, like on a charcoal. Think of a charcoal drawing, and that's the way we're doing it to get that kind of shading in the window. So we're setting aside some of the light that comes through from the daylight to influence the window and make a piece of glass be an inscription or a face or a crown or who knows what. So it's a tough process. I don't really enjoy glass painting. I'd rather design all day, but I'm still doing it for at least probably another year because I've got that many promises out there. But when you come, and I hope you all do, you will see that process up close and understand it a lot better.
Yeah, so you all know I'm in touch with Joe, and we're going to pick a date, and then we'll have a flyer for it. If anybody wants to, we'll have a little group outing to go to see the studio, and so
Great.
that'll be forthcoming.
Great.
Very good. Well, we went just about a half an hour over what we planned, but that's fine.
Very worth it.
I've enjoyed at least meeting you all through Zoom, and I hope to see you at the studio sometime.
Thank you so much, Joe. So, and for next week, he's actually on here, Maestro Anthony Visco, one of our local artists who will be speaking about our windows from an artistic perspective. So we hope to see you next week. Thanks so much again, Joe.
So long.
All right.
God bless.
Good night, everybody. Take care.
Good night, all.
Good night, everyone.